right off today with some viewer mail. Okay, a little mail from Mail Skull. I keep getting questions from you guys, and I apologize for not being better about staying on top of that and answering them. But, well, as you know, sometimes we do some viewer mail here on the Creepy Cheapies, and I'm just going to grab one here, and we'll see. We'll see if I can answer today's viewer mail question, which says thusly. Dear Dr. Lady, it seems like you've single-handedly painted more latex masks than any living person. So it would be great if you teach a class on mask making, or at least mask painting, for people who'd like to learn how to do it themselves. Have you ever thought about conducting your own class on mask art as a sort of adult ed course? Well, that's a good question, and thanks for writing. Illegible name there. Thank you for writing in. You know, I've been asked that many times. If I had a nickel for every time somebody has suggested that, I'd have $23.65. But the problem is, the reason I don't do that at one of the colleges or something, I really am not qualified. And that might sound odd because I have probably painted more masks from start to finish with nobody doing like any base coating for me or any of that. I probably have done more of that than any human on the planet, but I'm still not qualified to instruct, I don't think, because my area of expertise is limited. You know, I sort of do what I do, and most of the processes I use are things that I figured out for myself a long time ago. So I don't have the broadest of experience. I only have an enormous amount of experience with a limited capacity as far as what I've done and haven't done, if you know what I mean. So it's like if you went to medical school and you wanted to learn to be a doctor, you would hope that the instructor was somebody who had a lot of experience with all the different facets of things you would need to know in order to be a good doctor, and not somebody like me who could say, well, I met a guy who had a headache, so I gave him some ibuprofen once, and I was with someone who cut their finger, and I put a Band-Aid on it for him, you know. And I did actually pick a little tiny piece of broken glass out of a black girl's eye after a car accident we were in. Well, it wasn't an accident, it was an attack we were in. But anyway, very little experience medically, so you don't want me teaching you how to be a heart surgeon. And as far as the mask thing, my experimentation over the years has tended to run more towards, I wonder what would happen if I did this, or tried that, or, you know, methodology, rather than gaining the broader scope of other materials and such. So sometimes people ask me, have you ever tried this kind of mask paint, this brand? Is it any good? And I don't know. I make my own paint, and I never tried that. Or they will say, what do you think about this kind of latex? Is it any good to work with? I don't know. I just tried one thing until when I found something that I liked, I would stick with it. So I don't have a lot of broad experience with other kinds of materials, just the stuff and the processes that work for me. So you know, if it ain't broke, it ain't me, because I'm broke. That's not how that expression goes, but you know, things that work, you might as well keep using them. So I don't feel like I have anywhere near the scope of experience that I would need to teach an actual class. But what I can do is I will help you if I can with this stuff. I really will, and most of you guys know that. And we can come here and talk about processes and things that have worked for me and for Laura, my lovely and charming and long-suffering, amazing wife of 900 years. So that said, let's start with today's mask, which happens to be one of the most famous monsters of all time, one of the greatest monster movies of all time. I'm talking about, you know him, you love him, the Wolfman. That's right, the Wolfman is probably one of the big four, by which I mean like Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, and the Mummy. Those are sort of the big four monsters, the most heavy hitters. So along with Frankenstein and Dracula, what? No. Well, they know I mean Frankenstein the monster and not the doctor. They know that. Please. Anyway, I've known Frankenstein the monster since I was a boy. Well, I never was a girl, but I've known Frankenstein for a long time. He doesn't care if we call him Frankenstein. He's fine with that. The only things he doesn't like to be called are late for dinner, Shirley, and for some reason, Chuck. He's not big on that name. But other than that, he doesn't care. He says it's better than what they call him in most of those villages back in the old country, which was the monster. That's not a very good name. Anyway, the greatest Wolfman movie of all time, and the one that is the most influential by far, and the one that established the Wolfman as a classic monster, is the 1941 movie simply called The Wolfman. Which is as it should be, because it would be kind of weird if the movie that established the Wolfman for all time and was the most influential Wolfman movie was a movie called Dracula. That would be strange, right? But anyway, many Wolfman masks have been made over the years. The classic ones that everybody still, to this day, feels like you gotta own, and it's the most desirable, the best Wolfman masks, are the ones from Don Post Studios. And those are from back in the 1960s and 70s, and then the classic custom deluxe versions were reissued briefly in the 1988 season in a historic move from Don Post. But in addition to the Don Post Studios Wolfman masks, many other companies have done Wolfman masks over the years, and by Wolfman I'm referring to the Universal Studios Wolfman, Lon Chaney as Larry Talbot the Wolfman. Now there are any number of other Wolfman masks and werewolf masks, and you can make one that looks like whatever you want it to look like. Other companies have done their answer to a Wolfman that's more generic, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean just doesn't have the specificity of one that's supposed to be Lon Chaney as Larry Talbot. You dig? Grab your shovel. But in addition to the classic Don Post Wolfman masks, there have been other versions by companies like Elusive Concepts, Savage Eye, Rubies, Forum Novelties. Other people have done masks of the Wolfman, and every mask company has done masks of a Wolfman and various werewolves, which is to say, by Wolfman I mean human-shaped and werewolf kind of masks. Even though, yeah, I know a werewolf is a Wolfman, and they're kind of the same thing, but the way I use them, I tend to mean Wolfman as a human-looking, like a hairy humanoid, but a werewolf mask, I would be referring to something with big eyes and teeth and ears and such, muzzle sticking out, you know, like in the Howling, or something more like that, something more dog-like looking head. But anyway, millions of Wolfman masks later, one finally came out, another licensed version, actually officially licensed, from Trick or Treat. Who? Trick or Treat. And now the Trick or Treat Studios Wolfman is an official licensed likeness. And when this mask first came out, man, the hate was unbelievable. And the hate was unfair. And I hope that the sculptor doesn't think it was his fault, because when you look at this sculpture, really, honestly, I think this sculpture so nails it, is so good. It's one of the best Wolfman sculptures, I think, in mask history in terms of accuracy and fidelity to the character and the movie. So I hope it didn't hurt the feelings of the sculptor. Sculpted by, hey, look at that. That's interesting, isn't it? I hope Jasper Anderson, who sculpted this, didn't take it personally that people were so hard on the mask. It wasn't his fault. The sculpture is a thing of great beauty and elegance and sophistication. And the problem was the color scheme. Now, it is to Trick or Treat's credit that they do listen, and when people dislike a certain product, they can be moved to change it. The early copies of the Trick or Treat Wolfman mask, which is kind of perverse because normally you think, oh, I want an early copy of a mask before it gets worn out and loses detail and such. I want an early, pristine copy. That'll be better. Well, with Trick or Treat, sometimes you're better off to wait and get a later one, because sometimes the first ones have defects that are corrected as people respond and make them aware. This one is a later copy, and it doesn't look that bad. I think it's a pretty decent mask, but the first one suffered from a terrible color problem, in as much as they had pale skin and dark hair, and it gave him a Planet of the Apes look. In the Planet of the Apes movies, the ape characters have pale face and a very sharp, very clearly defined hairline running around the face, and then the other color hair. But in the Wolfman movies, there's very little difference. There's very little variance in gray value between his skin and his hair in those movies. And if for those of you who don't know what gray value is, I think that's a Malwart's store brand, isn't it? You know, like you can get gray value ice cream and gray value potato chips, and that's, yeah, never mind. Where were we? Oh yes, Wolfman. Now, one of the problems was the hair not matching. the skin and it didn't look like Wolfman, but that's not the fault of the sculptor. That's just the way the mask turned out. And it got better, and there were some variations over the last few years of this mask. And this one isn't too bad, but why doesn't it look like Wolfman? The same reason the Wolfman masks I had when I was a little kid, which was back when Louis XIV was still in power. The same reason none of those masks, even the classic Don Post ones, don't look quite like the Wolfman in the movies, because in the movies his hair is kind of short. It's just very, very thick. It's kind of frizzly and kinky and sometimes actually singed to give it a certain look, but it's pretty carefully placed and trimmed. And well, you can't really do that with a production mask. And you know what I mean by production mask, right? Yeah, these masks you can turn upside down and pull a live rabbit out of it, or a bunch of bananas and a bottle of milk and a dove flies out. No, that's not what production. By production I mean it's made on a production line. Some people say assembly line, but to me that sounds a little too soulless and mechanical, even though it means essentially the same thing. So I prefer to say production line, which means down the line of people in a studio or factory. And I like studio better than factory, although sometimes that's interchangeable too. Somebody does this part, hands it along, the next person does the next part. So that's production line, as opposed to artist masks, which is more like what I do, where you do every single thing yourself, start to finish, one person. Now, what went wrong with all those Don Post masks and all the other Wolfman masks over the centuries? Let us just presume for a moment, okay? Bear with me. No, there's not a bear with me. But let us assume that what I have here is the back of a Wolfman mask, and let's say there's his ears. Now again, this is the back of the Wolfman mask, and there'd be a slit right up there. Would be the slit up the back to help you put it on. You with me? But I don't want to put that slit there because it's annoying. But this is the back of the Wolfman mask. Now, let us assume that I have here in front of me, I know it's invisible, but use your imagination. Let us pretend I have here a can of glue. All right? Glue that's going to be used to apply hair to a latex mask, of which is the back. Do pay attention. I have a can of glue here. So let's open that up. Ow. Let's open. Hang on. That's stuck. Probably with a screwdriver. This works. That loose a little bit there. Ow. Keep hurting my thumbnail. There we go. I think that's got it. Now, try that. There we go. Okay. Now that we've got the can of glue open, let's pretend I have here a paintbrush, okay? And I'm going to apply glue to the mask. Let's pretend, if you will, that this glue line, where I'm going to touch the mask with the paintbrush dipped in glue, is represented by a dotted line, okay? So here is a dotted line across the latex. And attached to that, again, this is representation of a line of glue. So this is sticky. On top of that is laid a row of hair, thusly. Then I'm going to take my paintbrush and make another dotted line of glue and stick some more hair on it and make another one. And ideally, in a perfect world, which we certainly don't have, this would all overlap enough that it would cover the back of the mask, and from the back you would just see all that hair. And then just to be neat and tidy and orderly, let's say we have a dotted line of glue at the very top, and there's some hair hanging from that. So when the back of the mask shows, you see hair, hair, hair. Now, one of the problems with that is hair is horrifically expensive these days, and most of the major companies that make masks are a lot skimpier with it than Don Post Studios was back in the 1960s and 70s, so it doesn't always cover. And if somebody wears it, the hair gets matted and kind of starts to felt, kind of gets sticky and sticks to itself. And then you can see latex through here and there. And of course, there's, even before that, there's the greater problem that it doesn't lay on there. It doesn't lay on when you put it on like Wolfman's hair, because it's long, straight hair. And what you have is more like a Chewbacca look. You see how this looks more like Chewbacca hair? You guys know Chewbacca, right? Wolfman even knows who Chewbacca is. And by the way, if you go out to dinner tonight, don't order the Wookiee steak. I hear it might be chewy. But you can't achieve the look of a Jack Pierce makeup that took the better part of a day to put onto Lon Chaney with a paintbrush and some invisible glue and just a little bit of work like I've shown you. You can't replicate that. So what happens when you have somebody custom do it, such as Laura Lady? How does she do Wolfman mask that looks so much better? Well, that dotted line being the glue is like dotted line, hair. And this is a gross oversimplification, okay? But this is just to give you an idea. Dotted line, little bit of hair. Dotted line, little bit of hair. You see? And so it goes, and they overlap, and they're very small patches of hair, and dotted line, little bit of hair. So by the time Laura gets through and gets all the way up here, he's really covered with hair, and you're not going to see gaps, and you're not going to see lines and rows. You're going to see a much more realistic and organic looking, what we professionals call a mess of hair. So that's how that is achieved. And people knock the mask companies for not doing it that way, but again, it took all day. It took like 6 hours to put Lon Chaney's makeup on when he played the Wolfman. You can't have a mask that accurately recreates that and spends 8 hours, 6 hours, or however long putting it on there, because it would cost so much money. People have to be paid something for their time, you know. But here is how nice this mask can look with some Laura hair. Not actually cut off Laura's head, no, yeah. Although she has done that. There are some masks out there that have Laura Lady actual hair on them, but here is the standard production copy out of the bag, and here is one with a little TLC, and I did alter the paint, but not greatly. I darkened it just a little bit, and I shaded these lines in a little bit better to look a little more dramatic and a little more well, you know, a little more concise. Gives him a little more clarity, a little more life. I gave him a little bit of shading around the eyes, but I didn't do much. This is mostly Laura's work here, and she has haired this one not only with the style that I just described in all the little tiny itty bitty bits of hair, but she has endeavored to trim it and style it and spray it in such a way that looks like Lon Chaney really looked, because the Jack Pierce makeup worn by Lon Chaney actually had a pretty well-defined jawline and looked like he had a beard. And one thing that was very, very prominent that all the masks get wrong is that the hair is not that different of a color from the face, as divulged through a previous utterance from myself. So if you get hair color that looks pretty close to the paint color, that's a good start. If you have to perhaps formulate your paint color based on the color of available hair, that's a good way to go too. But it should be fairly close in terms of, if this were black and white, it shouldn't look like a white face with black hair like some of the masks do. It should look kind of vague in as much as it all runs together. And his hairline does not look like Planet of the Apes the way masks always do it. It's kind of unevenly applied and has some little peaks and points, all right, that makes it all sort of come together. And that's why a lot of the masks don't look quite like the Wolfman in the movies. Now in the various movies there are of course minor differences in his look. Sometimes he has more of a big pompadour in the front, and sometimes it's fairly flat in the movie. Other times he appears to be wearing like one of those big Russian fur hats, you know, made of Russian fur. Yeah. But it changes a little from scene to scene and movie to movie, because the original Lon Chaney, Lawrence Talbot Wolfman was in 5 different movies. So there's going to be a little bit of variance each time he's in a movie, and each time he transforms back and forth from Lon Chaney, Lawrence Talbot, to Wolfman the Monster. And in the movies, he generally has, I don't know if you can see this on your monitor, but he has a sort of a subtle part in the center, and then the hair is sort of feathered back those ways. My fingers won't bend backward. How do you, well, you know what I'm going for, right? It kind of goes back. And this is all teased, and I don't mean we called it bad names. I mean teased in the sense the hairdressers do it, so that it stays shaped like that. Another thing is that the Wolfman doesn't have a round face like most of the masks do, because the hair is put on at uniform thickness. In the movies, Wolfman from the front normally has bigger top knot sort of look, and then pretty straight down the sides. So he has a different shaped face. So this is exactly the same. These were two masks bought at the same time. Okay, this one left unmolested right out of the package, and this one severely molested by myself and Laura to make him look more like the Wolfman from the movies and less like a mask. Now, if you've got that much time put into something like this, are you really going to wear it to a Halloween party or to hand out candy on trick-or-treat night or something? You can, sure. Or you can, most of the collectors who own these just keep them for display and just have them like as a prop that they want to own. If you are going to wear one, you may need to cut the eyes out because the mask only comes with these little pupils drilled out. You hear me, all you little pupils? So it's very difficult if you want to do any seeing. You might have problems. And I'm going to blame that on you, Wolfman. That was Wolfman's fault. You may need to cut that out. There aren't any slits above there like there are with a lot of masks. They're just those little eye centers cut out. So that's not always the best as far as wearability. However, it sure does make a great display piece. And there I think you can see some of the differences between the various ways Wolfman masks can be done. And again, there have been great many over the years, and some of the ones that Laura has rehaired, some of the Trick or Treat studio ones even, have been haired more like this, but more like Trick or Treat meant for it to look, which is to say a little thicker, a little fuller, a little more even, with a neater hairline. Some people like the Wolfman to have Chewbacca style hair that's just flat, because that's how they remember the masks they grew up with, such as the old Don Post masks, where they had long flat hair rather than all this little frizzly kinky stuff going on. So as you can see, there's a bit of a difference there, but it's the same sculpture, and look how much more Wolfman you can get in it by doing things like bringing the hairline in a little closer onto the face and down a little farther onto the forehead, right to his nearer to his brows, etc., etc. So have some fun and do some work. You know, get some Wolfman hair going, and you can use different kinds of hair. We'll go into that a little bit more in a future episode, because this episode has already been 3 hours and 47 minutes long. But one thing that Laura typically likes to do, and I think this is just Laura, this isn't a thing that everybody has to do. Her favorite thing to do is blend hair using, I think they call that a hackle, you know, where you, but yeah, Laura likes to blend a little bit of real human hair with some of the crepe hair, and that gives it the more realistic amount of body and fluffiness and texture that real hair has. So that's what she normally does. Not every time. That's just kind of one of Laura's little things. When are we going to get Laura Lady on here to do some videos? People keep asking. I don't know. That's another question in the mail skull, I guess. But until next time, remember, even a man who's pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when he wears a mask, as long as it's not too tight.